Lisa Johnson stood outside the tall office building, shivering slightly in the morning chill. She carefully stacked cardboard boxes by the trash cans, lost in her thoughts. Lisa was used to the stares, the whispers, and the constant struggle that came with being both deaf and black in a world that often seemed to reject her at every turn. Mr. Carter, the new director, was in a foul mood inside the building. He had recently taken over the company and was determined to cut costs wherever possible. His first move had been to slash salaries, and as a result, many employees had quit. Those who remained did so only because they had no other choice. However, Mr. Carter's biggest problem was finding someone to clean the office. No one wanted to take the job for the pitiful wages he offered. Mrs. Grant, the deputy personnel officer, had been trying to convince him to raise the cleaner's salary for weeks. But Mr. Carter was unmoved. Mrs. Grant sighed. She needed the job, and arguing with Mr. Carter was futile. She glanced out the window, searching for a way to distract herself from the conversation, and saw Lisa working by the trash cans below. Before she could say anything, Mr. Carter noticed Lisa too. "Well, well," he muttered, a sly smile spreading across his face. "Looks like we've found our new cleaner." He opened the window and called Lisa. "Hey you, come up here for a moment." Lisa looked up, surprised, but she didn't move. She couldn't hear him and was focused on finishing her work. Annoyed, Mr. Carter called the security guard and ordered him to bring Lisa upstairs. When Lisa was escorted into the office, Mr. Carter was taken aback. He hadn't expected the woman he had seen from the window to be so neat and composed. Her clothes, though old, were spotless, and her dark hair was neatly pulled back. But what stood out to him most was the hearing aid in her ear, clearly an outdated and cheap model. It was then that he realized she was deaf. Mr. Carter, his voice dripping with condescension, began to speak slowly, exaggerating every word so she could read his lips. "Do you want to get paid? You will clean the office." Lisa stood still momentarily, her brown eyes scanning the room, taking in the unfriendly faces surrounding her. She nodded silently in agreement, knowing she had no other options. The look of triumph on Mr. Carter's face made her uneasy, but she kept her thoughts to herself. From that day on, Lisa arrived at the office early every morning, long before anyone else showed up. She cleaned with a diligence that no one had ever seen before. Within a week, the office was sparkling, everything shining with cleanliness. But despite her hard work, Lisa was not welcomed. Many of the employees mocked her behind her back, laughing at her for being deaf and for being black. They thought she couldn't hear their cruel jokes, but sometimes she could catch a few words here and there. Even so, Lisa never responded. She had faced far worse in her life and knew how to keep her head down and endure. After work, Lisa returned to her small, abandoned house on the city's outskirts. The house was old and drafty, but it was home, and she wasn't alone. Inside, she cared for 3 cats and 2 dogs she had rescued from the streets. They were her family, the ones who loved her unconditionally. Despite her meager earnings, she made sure her pets were well fed, often eating only bread and water herself to save money for them. Mrs. Grant was the only person in the office who seemed to appreciate Lisa's hard work. She noticed how spotless everything was, how Lisa never complained, and how she always showed up on time. But Mr. Carter remained dissatisfied. He expected Lisa to quit like everyone else, but she stayed, which frustrated him even more. As time passed, something unexpected happened. Some of the employees who had once mocked Lisa began to see her differently. They noticed that despite her struggles, she was intelligent and capable. Occasionally, Lisa would say something insightful that made even the most educated among them pause and think. It became clear that Lisa was far more than just a cleaner. Meanwhile, the company's performance was declining rapidly. Mr. Carter's cost-cutting measures were backfiring, and the branch lost clients and revenue. He would criticize the staff every morning, searching for someone to blame. But deep down, He knew that the failure was his own doing. The company's owner, Mr. Walker, was a self-made man who had built the business from the ground up. He was unhappy with how the branch was performing and decided to take matters into his own hands. He announced that the entire office would be closed for a sanitization day, giving everyone a paid day off. But in reality, he was installing hidden cameras throughout the office to see what was really going on. Mr. Walker began to review the footage daily, and it didn't take long for him to realize the source of the problem. He saw how Mr. Carter mistreated his staff, how the morale in the office was at an all-time low, and how Lisa was the only one keeping the place running. Then one day, something on the video caught his attention: a beautifully detailed business development plan, neatly written and full of innovative ideas. When Mr. Walker asked Mr. Carter who had created the plan, the director claimed it was his own work. But Mr. Walker wasn't fooled. He recognized the handwriting, clearly feminine and far too neat to belong to Mr. Carter. He reviewed the footage again and discovered that Lisa had stayed late in the office, carefully crafting the plan. She had drawn charts and written proposals with the ease of someone who had been doing it all her life. The next morning, Mr. Walker called Mr. Carter into his office. He didn't mince words. "You've nearly destroyed my company with your lies and incompetence," he said coldly. "You've fired the best people and even tried to take credit for someone else's work. Pack your things and leave. You're done here." Mr. Carter left the office, his face pale and his shoulders slumped. As he walked out, he heard Mr. Walker ask his secretary to bring Lisa in. Lisa entered the office nervously, unsure of what to expect. Mr. Walker gestured for her to sit down. "I want to know more about you," he said kindly. "You're clearly brilliant, and you haven't always lived this way, have you?" Lisa took a deep breath and began to tell her story. She explained how she had grown up in a poor neighborhood and how she had loved school and excelled in her studies despite her difficult home life. But everything changed after a tragic car accident that took the life of her fiancé and left her deaf. Since then, she had struggled to find work and had been rejected by society, both for her disability and for being a Black woman in a world that often judged her harshly. Mr. Walker listened intently, his expression softening as she spoke. "Lisa," he said, "I want you to take over as the executive director of this branch. Your skills and determination are exactly what this company needs. I do not doubt that you'll turn things around." Lisa was stunned. She couldn't speak for a moment, but then she nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. She had never expected such an opportunity, but was ready to prove herself. Under Lisa's leadership, the branch quickly began to recover. The atmosphere in the office improved, and even the employees who had once mocked her now respected her. Mr. Walker often visited the office, and over time, his relationship with Lisa blossomed into something more. A few months later, they were married in a small, intimate ceremony. Lisa's life had changed completely. Not only had she found success in her career, but she had also found love and acceptance. As a final surprise, Mr. Walker bought and renovated a shelter for her beloved pets, ensuring they would always be cared for. Months later, as she prepared to welcome their first child into the world, Lisa experienced yet another miracle. She was admitted to the hospital, and her hearing slowly returned, allowing her to fully embrace her new life, filled with love, hope, and triumph.